Welcome to the Golden Con podcast. Special guest with me today, Terry Liebman. Terry Liebman, round 2. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're back.
As am I.
So we just had a conversation on the couch, and sometimes I get halfway through the conversation, and I said, gosh darn, I wish the camera was rolling. So why don't we just pick up where we left off?
Pick it up, you bet.
Yeah. For those of you that saw the first interview I did with Terry, he has something called the Steakhouse Index.
Right.
Maybe just a second or two on what that index is.
You bet. So as it turns out, we discovered today that I started doing this back in 2016. The Steakhouse Index was designed as an alternative economic metric to gauge the economic activity in the United States vis-a-vis restaurant reservations, so that I could use that as a way to measure the economic fortitude of the economy that would help me with my own investment decisions.
Okay, so you said a bunch of words in there. For me,
okay,
I like baseball.
Yeah.
But you said something, restaurant reservations.
Yes.
Okay, I caught that part.
Okay.
So restaurant reservations throughout the country, steakhouses. What does that have to do with the economy?
Great question. My thesis is that if steakhouse reservations, expensive reservations, steakhouse reservations, are in high demand, that people have money.
And they're spending it.
And they're spending it.
Freely.
Yeah, because if you go to Mastro's, for example, for dinner, you're going to spend a couple $100 easy per person. You take a party of 4 to Mastro's, you're not going to get out of there for less than $800.
No chance.
So you better have money.
Yes.
Or a credit card, but you still have to have money to pay the credit card. So the theory is that if those reservations are in high demand, then there's a lot of fluidity in the economy, and people that have a lot of money are spending money. Conversely, if those reservations are not in demand, that economic group does not have a lot of free cash, or businesses are tightening their entertainment budgets, and therefore the economy itself might be shrinking or in a rough patch.
And you've tracked this for 8 years.
8 years.
And you get the information from Open Table.
Correct.
And you have plotted it, and we won't get into it today because I want to talk about all these other things.
Right.
But I want the audience to know that you can go to steakhouseindex.com.
Yep.
And you can look at how the steakhouses are doing according to reservations and compare it year over year, et cetera. Just a Reader's Digest version. How are things this year?
Things this year are stable. Last year was better. There was more demand for expensive restaurant reservations last year. But while the reservation demand is a little bit softer this year, it's stable. As you know, I track 40 expensive restaurants across 10 cities in the United States, 8 of which are also Federal Reserve Bank cities, which is a different topic. But I try to get a wide divergence of restaurants across from, I go from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way to San Francisco, and everyone in between, because I want to get a sense about not just how California is doing, but also every other part of the country.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fun.
Now, for today, I call you, irregularly, at least a couple times a year, to get some advice or bounce things off you, which I love. Thank you.
You bet.
And I read your blogs.
Thank you.
Are there other people reading your blog?
Sure. Yeah. No, I have not a lot of people that read my blog.
Well, I mean, there's some humility to blogging, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First of all, let's face it, there's a lot of opinions that you can read out there today.
Yeah.
And I don't know why people listen to my opinion, but some people find it interesting.
I love it.
Thank you.
I really do. And I'll try to comment to encourage you every now and then, whether it's on LinkedIn or your blog. So
I appreciate that.
Keep it going. But you told me on the couch, you blog for you. Because it keeps you sharp.
And that's
right?
essentially
Explain that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is that today there's so much information coming at us constantly that I have trouble deciding what is real, what is true, what is essential, especially if I'm making investment decisions in stocks and bonds or real estate or other types of investments. I want to be able to really have my finger on the pulse of what's happening. And I am unable to do that by listening to the mainstream media or other people's opinions. I can only do that if I dig deep into the data and make sure that the various different, as you said, the alphabet soups of agencies, whether the IMF or the Fed or the BEA or BCS, whoever it is, that if they're giving me data that they've been tracking, like my Steakhouse Index, every single week or month for decades, then I can see a trend of how that data is moving, and I can get their commentary on it, and then I can form my own opinions. And so I started doing the Steakhouse Index really because I wanted to be able to assess for myself what the status of the economy is, to be able to decide if we're seeing an economic expansion, an economic contraction, and that was the purpose. Over the years, I've accumulated a few hundred readers, maybe as many as 1,000, I don't know. But a lot of them are bank presidents, a lot of them are doctors, lawyers, people that also apparently find the need to get good source data so they can make, hopefully, good decisions.
Yeah. And you put a lot of context in there.
I do.
Which is what I like. I always say, you can't really understand the national debt because there's no context to what 1 trillion, 5 trillion,
Right.
20
Right.
trillion
Right,
is.
right,
I mean,
right.
how do you make any context out of that?
Exactly.
Right?
And that contextual framework really is important, because when you say, I was listening actually to a blog on the way here today, and they were talking about how the national debt is now $35 trillion. And you hear that number, and you ask somebody on the street, what does that mean? They'll say, well, I don't know, what's a trillion? Because they have no way to contextualize that.
How would they know?
Exactly. Yeah. So what I try to do is make sure that the numbers that I use are all contextualized so that you can understand that, well, 35 trillion is a lot, but how about what's the net worth of all Americans? If I said to you, if you added up the net worth of all Americans in the aggregate, all 330 million Americans, what's our net worth? Well, the Federal Reserve puts out a paper every month called the Z1 report that tells you that information. And right now, the net worth of all Americans collectively is about $160 trillion. And so you say, well, the country owes 35 trillion. The net worth of all Americans is 160 trillion. Well, I guess in that metric, it doesn't look that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's bad. But again, if you understand these numbers and the relationships, you start to have the ability to weigh and measure for yourself about what they mean.
Yeah, that's perfect. Because if I told someone that, how much do you think this hamburger is? 50 cents, $5, $50, or $500? Obviously no one's going to say $500.
Right.
No one's going to say 50 cents. But when I talk about the national debt with somebody, if I go on the street, they don't know if it's 1 trillion, 5 trillion, 20 trillion, or 30 trillion.
Sure.
That's the same scale.
Exactly.
And so, of course, it makes no sense to people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
but you helped make sense with the ratio there. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, more on your blog. What I like about your blog is, you always have a theme, and then you say, why should you care? Mm-hmm. And then you get into this large alphabet soup.
Right.
And it's GDP, FED, IMF, CPI, PPP. And I'm like, oh, here he goes. But, we talked about why you do that.
Right.
Right? Because it's the source.
Yeah.
And so a little bit about these sources that you pull from.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Again, it's become the nature of today's mainstream media that they no longer, again, in my opinion, share fact, they share opinion. And they all have one. And they oftentimes have very divergent or different opinions. What used to be somewhat factual really is no longer today. And so when I hear someone say, oh, the national debt is way out of whack, it's so high, and then others say, well, but no, it's this, or the federal budget is out of whack, and tax collections are way down. I mean, I hear this all the time. My comment to myself is, gee, I wonder if that's true. And so I start digging in, and I'll go pull up the Treasury's own reports on what kind of tax collections and spending are happening at the national federal level. And I start looking at the data. So I can actually, to that point, assess whether or not the statement itself is inherently true. And I found that this helps me understand this world, not only local, but U.S. and also globally, the world and how it fits together. And it really helps me develop my own thesis about everything. And that's why I do it.
Based on the fact, yeah.
Yeah,
I gave you
fact.
an analogy of my pastor, he'll preach. And he'll preach about what Jesus said or what the Bible said,
Right.
Old Testament, New Testament. But every now and then he'll say, listen, this is where I'm pulling the sermon from.
Right.
And you're welcome. I encourage you to open your Bible and confirm what I am saying, because I am not making this up. I am pulling from this source, which, I believe is the truth. Whether or not you believe this is true, separate issue altogether. We would assume most people in the sermon probably believe this is the truth. But I love how he always does that. Right. So I know he's just not putting his spin on things.
Exactly.
He is pulling it, and that's what you're doing with your economic data.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe the Treasury report
right.
is a separate issue.
Exactly.
But that's where you're getting your information. So I
Sure.
thank you for doing that, because I know it takes a lot of research.
Well, it does, but it's the research, like I said, that I do anyway.
Yeah.
And when I write it, I want to make sure that if someone has the desire to read it, that at least they know that I'm not just making it up, that if they actually want to go back to the source, if they want to see what the GDP numbers are on the source, sometimes I even have a hyperlink, but usually I'll say, this came from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA. So go look it up.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while you're here, can I get some free coaching?
Sure.
Okay. Let me tell you, I got to be careful what I ask for here, but I'm going to tell you a problem that we have at my company.
Okay.
And, of course, the people that work at my company, they watch this, so they're going to hear this, but this is not a secret, so I'll go ahead and tell it to you. So, I've been in business 30 years. I've seen a lot of ups and downs.
Sure.
And we've had some good years and some bad years. And, we are, the situation at my company right now is every single person that works at our company, they want a raise. But, that's kind of always been the case.
You bet.
I mean, I guess I could never remember a time when everyone thought they were paid fairly.
Right.
Or not fairly, but they didn't want more.
Right.
So that's fine. That's fine. But I'm feeling it now more than ever, because I look at it from the lens of just a person. Most things are up 25 to 30%
right.
since the pandemic.
Right.
But our salaries haven't kept up with that.
Sure.
So that's pain for everybody.
Yes.
Pains me, it pains them. Here's the interesting part. I got everybody here that wants more money. I'm good with that. We have a client base that wants to discount. They want discounts.
Right.
Okay, let me factor this in. They want discounts. They want more money. I feel stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got to figure this out. I'm not going to do this by myself. We got to figure this out.
Sure.
But this is a real strain that's going on.
It is.
Are other people feeling the strain, or am I the only one feeling this?
No, this is a very common problem. I mean, it was a problem before the pandemic, but the pandemic really kind of unanchored an awful lot of things. It just seemed to have cut the strings, and a lot of these things went crazy. You can argue about the source of the inflationary bulge that we've had, and that's another topic as well. But we find ourselves at a time now post-pandemic when there are still a lot of disruptions and dislocations, and this is one of them. There are a lot of employers who are straining under the same problem because technology is making a lot of things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So clients want discounts, but at the same time, employees are finding inflation pushed up their cost of living, so they want raises. As I mentioned before, the same thing's happening in other businesses too. For example, office buildings. I mentioned I own an office building, and at one time the building was full, and then the pandemic came. And then the building was empty. The government sent everybody home. Everybody must stay home, shelter in place. And so all of a sudden, a building that was leased now became empty, but still leased. But as the leases expired, the tenants, many of them didn't renew. Their comment was, well, no one works in the building anymore. Why should we renew? So I find myself with a building that's becoming increasingly vacant. At the same time, my cost of operating are through the roof. Utilities are through the roof. All the other operating expenses are higher. So I actually face the exact same problem with my commercial real estate. Now, this is not true with all commercial real estate. This is unique to office buildings. And as a result, a lot of value has been lost in office buildings. And office building owners are struggling to try to deal with this paradigm.
It just sends chills up my spine. I'm listening to this, and it's the exact same problem I have.
It's the exact same problem, and again, all created by essentially this unanchoring that happened from the pandemic. That's kind of the source of all of these problems. It's not maybe that they all started there, but they were exacerbated. They were magnified by that.
Yeah, and a lot of people working, particularly high intellect jobs,
sure,
are working from home. Mm-hmm. And, my opinion on that is, well, we've always worked from home.
Sure.
We had people work from home when they didn't live by the office. And that's still happening. And, of course, we support that to the level that we supported pre-pandemic.
Sure.
My view is if you live by the office, come in, because we want more collaboration.
You bet. Yeah.
We really haven't changed that.
Right.
But what has changed is that used to be an oddity because we were in tech.
Right.
Now everyone's working from home.
Yeah. It's
Right? Whether you're in tech or not. I
Yeah.
mean, if you're in customer service, I hear, I call my insurance company, I hear kids in the background.
Sure.
They're at home.
yeah.
Yeah. So they're not in the office.
No, in fact, as you go, again, local, national, international, the number's 50%. Pre-pandemic, in fact, if you can find charts, I could show you charts that show occupancy levels like right around 100%, and then the pandemic dropped to zero-ish, and now it's kind of come back up, and it's now hovering around 50%. So across the world, occupancy levels are around 50% of what they were before. The problem with that is that the industry, and not only the industry, but all of the industries that rely on that are a downtown coffee shop or downtown restaurant that's near an office building that now is half full, they have half their customers.
Yeah, the ecosystem that's attached to
Exactly.
that in San Francisco,
Yeah.
there are skyscrapers that are 1/3 full.
Yeah.
That kills the coffee shop.
Coffee shop doesn't have the customers it had
Yeah.
before. So so the problems roll downhill
Yeah.
and affects a lot of other people. So there's a lot of movement to get people back in the office, but the reality is that it was hard to get them out, and now it's hard to get them back.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to just fight through it.
Indeed.
So
Indeed.
of course, what we're doing is we're innovating. We're figuring out what we
Exactly.
can do
Yeah.
to add value that we can charge a premium for,
Exactly.
so that we can continue with our company, hopefully for many years to come. And we'll figure it out. I'm not hitting
That's
the
what we
panic
do.
button.
Right.
But again, this is the reality of what we got.
And that is a reality, right? Throughout the history of humanity, we figure things out.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
That's right. So, okay, one of your blogs caught my attention. It was a counterfactual thinking. I never heard that before, and it was the title of one of your awesome blogs. I said, look, it said, what is counterfactual thinking? So, what is it? And how does it apply to what you do?
Well, what's interesting about finance, economics, and most things in life is that we do a lot of this if-then stuff. Well, if this, then that. If this, then that. Well, we kind of take the if as a factual and the then as a factual, but the reality is it's not. It's an implication, right? So counterfactual really is just kind of a viewpoint, a lens to look at to this if-then thing. And I use the example in the blog that if Fred had set his alarm, no, Fred was late because he didn't set his alarm. If Fred had set his alarm, he would have been on time. Well, the fact of the matter is we don't know if that's why Fred was late. All we know is that Fred was late.
We don't know if he would have been on time.
No, we don't.
Even if he got up on time.
No, we don't. He might have gotten up on time and gotten in a car accident. He might have gotten up on time.
We
and
don't know.
Lost his pants.
It's
We just don't know.
It's an untrue statement.
It's a statement that's not supported by fact.
Yeah.
So a counterfactual is just kind of it's a what if kind of an argument. Well, if this is true, then is this true? And the answer is we'll never know. We'll never know if Fred was late because his alarm didn't go off. We just never know. But a lot of people in the media argue this way. And so they're always saying that because of this fact, then this fact is true. And I take offense at that. My contention is you should state the facts. I have no problem with that. But your opinion then is what should have happened afterwards. And therein lies the problem. So counterfactual is just kind of a lens to look at a way to measure these kinds of statements where someone says, well, if this happened, then this happened. And it may or may not be true. It may simply be a counterfactual that's just looking at a different set of potential outcomes that didn't really happen. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And I think, a lot of people will probably agree with this, but news, you think of that as factual
Right.
information.
Right.
And today's news just isn't.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Unfortunately, it's mostly opinion.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm of the age where I used to know of a guy named Walter Cronkite. And he used to be on the nightly news. And everyone turned on Walter Cronkite because you knew that if he said it, it was true. Well, that day has passed, as has Walter Cronkite. But the reality is that when people say things on mainstream media today, I mean, the first thing you should do, you should say to yourself is, I don't think that's true. And if I think it is, I should at least fact check it.
Yeah. Against alphabet soup, if
Indeed.
you will. or your own research.
That's
your
right.
own research.
That's right.
Back to Walter Cronkite.
Yes.
What also is interesting about that time, the responsibility that he had, because there's only one source of news.
Right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So your neighbors didn't get to choose. But I think it works if it's factual.
Yeah, and he, as I recalled, again, this is my recollection.
Yeah.
He felt a commitment, a personal obligation to the truth. Whereas today, I think people say things because they want to manipulate you or to get you to do something. Whereas back then it was like, this is the fact, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Whereas today it's like, well, if I can manipulate you somehow to get you to do this or that, which is, again, why I started the blog. I felt manipulated.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to dig into the underlying data so that I could really understand the essence.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring us back. We'll close it up here. I want to bring us back to a time that you and I spent together that I frankly, I missed this time. You know, for our audience, Terry, you and I met with another 15 people-ish.
Right.
Once a month for an entire day for at least 10 years.
Right.
Yeah. So there I am meeting with you and 15 other people. And what was neat about that group is that this group had a lot of different lenses. I mean, we were all together when Disneyland announced they were shutting down.
Yes.
And the NBA said no more, and they're going to cancel the NCAA. This was the pandemic. And I remember all of us in the room.
Right.
And that noise is kind of going on, kind of 9/11-y, but this was a virus.
Right.
And I remember we had one guy yelling martial law, everyone, and then some people went out, and I think one guy went out and got his gun from the car. And then we got other people who, we had everybody, because we had a lot of different people with different ways of thinking in that group. But what I loved about the group is this group, which was together for years, we all had the same kind of wants for the ending. We all wanted peace of mind. We all want what's best for our kids.
Sure.
We all want what's best for our families. And we all have different ways of looking at it. We had an amazing way of working together.
Right.
And I really missed that part of that group.
I do too.
And I really do. And I just think that people should try to find ways to get in those groups. Yeah. I see people just gravitating to people just think like them.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
And I think it's really important that you find people that don't think like you and have regular meetings.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah, it's a shame that we find ourselves at a time where the basic common values that we all have, I think we all have, of just living your life and being a human being, doing the right thing, those things seem to have lost their importance in today's society. But that was the essence of the group, right?
Yeah.
That we all had families, and we all believed in our kids having a good childhood and supporting our wives and being good human beings and good contributors to society. And because we had that foundation, we could disagree on an awful lot of other things, but still have that in common. And I think, to your point, I think that bound us together.
That was my experience.
Yeah.
Yep. And I was just talking to Brenda the other day. I miss it. I love that group. So,
I agree.
But the guys are still around.
They are. We still see them.
We still see them. So,
Yeah.
Hey, Terry, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
We're going to have round 3 because, I'm going to commit right now. I got to have you in here once a year.
Hey.
Because it's really fun. Cole's saying, yeah, let's go. He likes it. Yeah. So
Happy to do it. It's
we're
always
going to
fun.
put this on the social media. One of these clips that we did had over 1,000 views.
Fabulous. I'm famous.
That's pretty cool. All right. Thanks, brother.
Jason.
All right.
A real
Thanks.
pleasure.
You bet.
Thank
You
you.
bet. Yeah.